Hey guys, tonight we step barefoot into a world where survival isn't a metaphor, it's a fact. You'll wake up hungry, in pain, half covered in fur and ash, and already running out of time. We're going 30,000 years into the past, into the Ice Age wilderness of Europe, where you aren't some noble savage wandering in peace. You're cold, underfed, possibly infected, and every rustle in the trees could be a predator with better teeth, speed, and luck than you. This isn't a calm walk through the forest. This is a daily game of hide and bleed. You'll face starvation, superstition, and loneliness so deep it's carved into your bones. Forget what you think you know about cavemen. There is no dragging women by the hair, no neatly painted walls in every cave, and no guaranteed fire at night. You are prey just as often as predator. And every small victory, catching a rabbit, building a shelter, not dying, is a miracle. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are cold before you even open your eyes. The air in the cave stinks of ash, meat grease, and sleeping bodies. Your breath clouds out in front of you. You curl tighter into the fur that covers your shoulders, wolf, stiff with age and blood, and press closer to the three others who shared your fire last night. One of them shifts in sleep, exhaling sharply. You hope she doesn't wake up hungry. You don't want to fight her over the last bits of marrow. You sit up slowly, your back aches. The stone floor under your hips is unforgiving, but it's safer than the mud outside. You blink into the pale blue light, leaking in through the cave mouth. Mist hangs just outside like a trap. The fire is almost dead, just black coals and one glowing ember. You lean forward and breathe gently on it. Smoke curls. You add dry grass, then a twisted bit of pine branch. It hisses. It catches. A small, angry flame rises up. You have fire, for now. You dig your fingers into a pouch hanging from the wall, tied with sinew. Inside, the last of your dried mushrooms, a scrap of rabbit skin, and one hard, frozen berry. You divide the mushrooms into 4 chunks, nibble one, and toss the rest to the others. Nobody says thank you. Words are scarce this early. You strap a flint knife to your waist. It's not sharp enough to fight with, just sharp enough to bleed with. Outside, your feet crunch on frost-slick ground. Every step is cold, lightening up your shins. The light is grey and flat, the sun smothered behind layers of low cloud. Trees stretch overhead, tall, skeletal, creaking in the wind. You scan for movement. Deer, boar, something worth chasing. But there's nothing. You keep walking. Past the broken log where the owls nest. Past the thorn bushes that once tore your arm open. Your breath is loud in your ears. Your gut is cramping now, not from illness, just from emptiness. Then, noise. Not an animal. A human voice, guttural, sharp. You freeze. Drop low behind a boulder. The hairs on your arms rise. You're not alone. 2 figures. Not from your group. Not from any group you recognize. One has a spear. The other has ochre smeared across his cheeks like war paint. You don't know their words. You only know the tone. Tired. Tense. Possibly desperate. You wait. 10 breaths. 20. When they move on, you keep still for longer than you think you need to. The wild doesn't reward impatience. It eats it. Later, you find a trail. Deer, maybe a few hours old. The droppings are still soft. You kneel, Press your fingers into the hoof prints, feel the dampness of the earth. You follow. The tracks wind through brush and thorns, over icy roots and shallow streams. You move quietly, but not perfectly. A branch snaps. The trail ends in a clearing. You step out and see them. 4 deer, grazing, 1 limping. You freeze. You wait. Your mouth floods with saliva. Hunger makes your vision tunnel. You notch a spear, hand-carved, heavy. You raise it, exhaling, and a sudden burst of wind throws off your balance. The deer jerk up their heads and bolt, all but the limping one. It lingers, just for a heartbeat. You throw. The spear hits the ground beside it with a thud. The deer flinches, then stumbles away, gone. You scream silently, just air, just frustration. And then you sit, in the snow, for a long time, until your skin starts to feel numb and your stomach doesn't hurt anymore. It just feels hollow, like the rest of you. Eventually, you rise. You head back toward the cave, but not directly. You stop by a stream, smash through the thin ice, and scoop up a handful of water. It's so cold, it hurts your teeth. You drink anyway. You pass a dead tree and see something nestled in the hollow. Eggs, bird eggs. You reach in. 2 crack in your hands. 1 survives. You wipe the others off on your leg and carry the last one home. Back at the cave, they're waiting. They look at you, not with hope, just expectation. You toss the egg to the youngest. He eats it raw. You all do. There's no time to boil water today. The sun is dipping low now, barely visible behind the clouds. One of the others grunts and gestures toward the cave mouth. You nod. You understand. You have to block the entrance again. Wind will shift tonight. You drag a few broken branches across the opening. Stuff moss into the cracks. It won't stop a bear, but it'll confuse the wind enough to let you sleep. Before bed, you huddle again around the fire. The flames flicker weakly. Someone tells a story in broken sounds and gestures a tale of a girl who became a star, not metaphorically, literally. She walked out of her body and burned in the sky. You nod. It's nonsense, but it's warm nonsense. Someone adds a stick to the fire. It hisses. The flames brighten, then die down again. You lie back. The fur stinks of old blood and dried sweat. Your feet are still cold. You hear a wolf cry in the distance, then another, closer. No one speaks. You pull the fur tighter and shut your eyes. Tomorrow, you'll do it all again. If you're lucky, you wake again, but not fully. It's that kind of waking where your eyes open, but your thoughts are still buried under fog and firelight, and the last whisper of dreams you can't name. The others are still asleep, curled up in heaps, slack-mouthed, occasionally twitching like dogs. Your bladder aches. You sit up slowly, bones creaking, joints swollen from cold and damp. You're not even 30 winters old, but your knees already feel like they've seen 100. You don't sigh. You've learned not to waste breath on what doesn't help. You duck under the branches at the cave mouth. The sun hasn't risen, but the world is gently leaking light. A deep purple-blue haze hangs between the trees. Everything is wet and cold. Again, you piss on a stone near the edge of the brush. Steam rises. It almost feels sacred, this little proof that your body still works. Then you listen, really listen. Birds, yes. Distant, sparse. Good. If they're still singing, the predators aren't moving yet. You crouch, pull your fur tighter, and scan the tree line. The cave is uphill. You have an advantage, but it won't matter if you're taken in your sleep. You drop into a squat near the trail, and smear a dab of ash across your cheeks. It's not war paint, it's habit. Ash keeps the bugs off, and it makes your face harder to see at night. You do it even when the insects are dead and gone. Ritual is its own kind of warmth. A rustle in the brush, you freeze, breath locked in your chest. Thena badger. Slow, fat, stumbling through the leaves. It doesn't see you. You let it pass. You don't waste a spear on that. Not today. You've already failed once. You gather some bark, a clump of dry lichen, and a long stick, half charred from a lightning fire weeks ago. You'll bring it back. Wood like that holds flame longer than anything else. Every spark matters. Back in the cave, the others are stirring. One coughs wetly, not a good sign. You glance at her thin face, brittle hair, yellow in the eyes. If she dies, the firewood will stretch further. You don't think it cruel, you think it real. You hand the charred stick to the oldest man. He nods, then bites into it like it's food. Maybe it is, a little. He was never the same after the bear took his foot. He talks to stones now. You eat a strip of hide, not meat, just hide, scraped, boiled, dried, like chewing on a frozen belt. But it fills the gut just enough to silence it. The boy eats one too, with eyes half closed. He doesn't speak yet, maybe never will. He's lived 6 winters. That's more than his brother. Mid-morning now, time to move. You leave the sick one behind. She's not useful today. She doesn't argue. You and the boy head toward the river. It's a gamble. The ice may have cracked enough to fish. You carry your spear like a limb, not as a weapon, just as a part of you. Along the way, you pass through a stretch of burned forest black trees, rising like fingers from white ash. This is where the fire came last year. You remember the heat, the smoke, the screams of animals that didn't run fast enough. But now the ground is soft, new shoots are growing, and you see tracks. Boar. You nudge the boy. He sees them too. He nods. You don't need words. You follow. The tracks curve downhill, toward the river. You keep low. The boy follows well. He's learning. That gives you something close to hope. You find the boar near the bank snorting, rooting at the frozen mud. Big, alone, scarred from past fights. You know this one. You've seen it before. It nearly killed one of yours last moon. You grip your spear tighter. Your heart drums in your ears. The boy shifts beside you too loud. The boar hears. It turns, snorts, stamps. You rise too late. It charges. You shove the boy to the side and brace the spear. The boar is fast. A sudden thunder of hooves and breath and fury. The point strikes flesh but glances off bone. The shaft snaps, you fall. The world spins. The boy screams. The boar crashes past you, bleeding but alive, vanishing into the brush. You lie on your back, staring up at the clouds. One looks like a mammoth, another like nothing at all. The boy crawls over, wild-eyed. His hands are shaking. You sit up, ribs screaming. Nothing broken, but bruises are blooming like fungus. You grunt, spit, taste iron. Failure again. You limp to the water's edge. The river is half thawed slushy, loud. You take a stone from the shore and begin to hammer a hole through the thinner spots. Not to fish, just to focus. The boy sits nearby. You hand him a length of twine sinew from a deer long eaten. He knows what to do. He begins shaping a snare. You work like this for an hour, 2. Then a bird lands nearby. Close, too close. You freeze. The boy sees it too. He lifts a small stone and throws. It hits the bird in the neck. It dies. Not a big kill, but a kill. You both stare, then laugh. Not because it's funny, but because it's something, anything. You build a small fire right there on the shore. Rub sticks, blow on the ember. You pluck the bird, quickly skin it, gut it, roast it. It smells like burnt feathers and life. You tear off the legs and hand one to the boy. He devours it. So do you. You eat everything, bones, skin, eyes, nothing is wasted. You lick your fingers clean and smear the grease on your lips to trap moisture. This is what counts as a good day. The sun is lower now. You gather the bird guts, hang them in a tree near the path. A marker, a lure. Maybe a wolf will take the bait. Maybe you'll be there waiting. You limp back to the cave. The boy helps carry firewood. You say nothing, but you nod once. He smiles. Inside, the fire is low but alive. The old man mumbles a chant to the stones. The sick woman is still breathing. You can smell it from the doorway, sick breath, sour and sharp. She may not last the night. You sit. The boy curls up beside you, his fingers still sticky with bird grease. You rub a sore spot on your leg and stare into the flames. Tomorrow, the ice might be thicker or thinner. The boar may return, or you may not. But tonight, you're warm. And warm is enough. You don't sleep right away. Nobody does. The firelight flickers across the cave ceiling, casting shapes that look like hands, antlers, teeth. Smoke curls lazily toward the exit, mixing with your breath. The stone is warm where you sit. Only a little, only where the fire kisses it. You press your hands into that spot like it matters. The boy is already curled up, head against your side. He still smells faintly of bird meat and smoke. His face is slack, peaceful for once. If you squint, you could almost mistake him for dead. But he twitches now and then. He's dreaming, probably of birds he can actually catch. The old man stirs beside the fire, muttering to the stones again. You catch bits of it, nonsense words, maybe old prayers. He's telling the fire a story, not for you, for them, the ancestors, or the shadows, or both. You don't know anymore. The old stories blur. The sick woman coughs again, wet, painful. You turn your head but can't ignore it. It echoes in the stone. She's sweating. Her fur is soaked through. You don't get close. You don't need her sickness. You wrap your arms around your knees and stare into the flames. They dance like they remember something. You shift, wince. Your ribs are sore from the fall earlier. Your spear is broken. Again, you'll need a new one tomorrow, which means stone, which means walking, which means more hunger. Again, the fire pops. A spark lands on your arm. You don't flinch. You remember other nights, some darker, some warmer, one where the mammoth came, not just walked past charged. Your sister died that night, dragged her out, crushed her like a gourd. You still dream about her hair long, twisted into beads. You still have one, in your pouch. You don't take it out often, only when the sky is especially cruel. Tonight it is. The old man stops muttering. He looks at you. Then he leans forward and throws something into the fire. You smell it, instantly burnt bone, herbs, something sharper underneath. The flames surge. Everyone else stirs. It's time. No one speaks. They just shift closer. Even the sick woman. The ritual is simple. There is no name for it. It just is. The boy sits up, eyes wide. He's never done this before. You reach into the pouch tied to your hip. Inside, a bone flute, cracked but whole. A small round stone with a hole in the center, a dried scrap of wolf fur, all sacred, all stolen from the dead. You place them gently, in front of the fire. The old man begins to chant, not words rhythms, grunts, sharp exhales, deep chesty growls that rise and fall like wind through trees. You join him, not because you believe, because you must. The boy watches, then mimics. The chant deepens, slows. The flames shift colours orange to blue to yellow again. The sick woman closes her eyes. Her lips move. Maybe she's begging. Maybe she's offering something. Maybe she's already halfway gone. You take the bone flute and blow gently. The note is thin, reedy, ugly, but it cuts the silence like bone through flesh. It lingers in the air, bouncing off the cave walls. The boy shudders. The chant continues. You play again, this time a lower note, a warning, a promise. The fire spits. Shadows flicker on the walls. Your shadows. You've seen them 1,000 times. They still feel like strangers. Long limbs, flat heads, flickering eyes. The old man raises his hands, stops the chant. Silence. Then he speaks, a single word. He points to the wall. You all turn. There, in the soot-blackened stone, is the mark. A handprint. Old, faded, but still visible. Fingers splayed wide. Thumb bent. You don't know whose hand it was. No one does. But every winter you repaint it. With blood, with ochre, with ash. It's time again. You stand, walk to the wall. Take a smear of ash from the fire pit. Mix it with your spit. Press your hand into the paste. Then onto the stone, just below the old one. Your mark. The boy watches, then does the same. His print is small, too small. You wonder if it will still be there when he's gone. The woman tries, but her hand shakes too much. She leaves only a smear. The old man laughs softly, then stops. Because the woman exhales sand does not inhale. No one moves. You lean close. Still, cold, gone. The boy looks at you, eyes wide. His lips tremble. You say nothing. You rise, walk to the fire. Tear a strip from your own fur cloak. Wrap her face. Not the body, just the face. That's the rule. That's what keeps her quiet. Then you drag her to the cave mouth. Not outside, just to the edge. Tomorrow you'll bury her. Or leave her for the scavengers. Depends on the weather. You return to the fire. The boy is still awake, still staring. You offer him a scrap of hide. He shakes his head. You press it into his hands anyway. He eats. You lie down. Not far, not close. The fire crackles. The old man hums again. You close your eyes. You dream of the mammoth again, not the real one, a giant one, eyes like stars, tusks like rivers. It walks over the mountains and turns them into bone. You wake before dawn. There is frost on your eyelashes. The fire is dead, but your breath still clouds the air. So you know one thing. You are alive. You don't remember the first time you almost died. There have been too many. The near drownings, the gut infections, the bone that split your foot wide when you stepped wrong in a stream bed full of glassy shale. Death isn't an event out here. It's a companion. It waits. It circles. Sometimes it taps you gently on the shoulder just to remind you it's still around. But you're not dead. Not yet. Which means you've gotten good at staying that way. You've learned how to cheat a world that doesn't care whether you wake up tomorrow. How to trap a rabbit with nothing more than cordage and a few bent twigs. How to coax fire from cold flint, even with fingers so numb they feel like stones. How to follow the tracks of a bleeding animal for miles until your knees give out and your mouth is full of blood from biting down your hunger. You've learned that survival is not about courage, it's about systems. And your system, crude as it is, begins with the kill. You don't hunt alone anymore, not unless you're desperate or angry. Hunting is a team act. Someone flushes, someone flanks, someone finishes. If one of you fails, you all go hungry. You've learned to move like a pack, not a human pack, but more like wolves, silent, swift, and with a kind of brutal grace that doesn't ask permission. You've also learned to read the land the way others read faces. The scratch marks on trees, left by bears, rubbing the itch out of their winter coats. The way the deer trails bend subtly east when the wind comes from the caves. The smell of bad water, sharp, metallic, too still. The smell of good water, running, mossy, cold enough to numb your teeth. When you're lucky, you find fish in the river, pools thin, quick things that glimmer like knives. You make spears for them too, but shorter ones, barbed tips. You strike fast and high, aiming for the flicker, not the body. It's like catching moonlight with your hands. You miss more than you hit. But then there's the other food, the not meat kind. You've come to appreciate the bitterness of wild greens, the sting of raw nettle on your tongue, the gummy satisfaction of tree sap when you're starving. In spring, you dig for tubers in the soft dirt. In summer, berries. If the birds haven't gotten there first, and if you eat the wrong one, you don't wake up. You remember that lesson clearly. The man who ate the red berries with the white spots, the shaking, the vomiting, the blood. You buried him with his hands still clenched around his stomach. You don't eat those anymore. Water is simpler. You know where it lives. Streams, mostly. Melted snow in shallow stone bowls. You've learned to drink from moving water, not standing. You've watched what happens to the ones who drink from still ponds days of sweating, of curled up whimpering, and black stools that smell like rot. Sometimes, if the water feels wrong, but you must drink, you boil it first. You drop a red-hot stone into your water, skin made from a cleaned-out stomach, and let it sizzle. The steam carries the sickness away. You hope. And then there's the matter of wounds. You've been cut, stabbed, gouged, and cracked open. Everyone has. If it doesn't kill you instantly, you get to play the guessing game. Will it fester or seal? You've seen infections that swell a man's leg until the skin splits open. You've seen others who survived worse, walking again after a broken hip, dragging one leg like a lazy predator. You treat your wounds the old way, with moss, with ash, with crushed root pulp and patience. You learned which leaves numb the skin and which ones make it worse. You know that spider silk helps stop bleeding. That pine resin draws out the bad humours, that if you get a fever and don't sweat it out by morning, you dig your own grave while you still have the strength. You've seen healing too, real healing. The way a burn turns from blister to crust to scar. The way a deep gash closes if you keep the flies out long enough. You don't call it medicine. There is no word for that. Just knowing, doing, watching. You also prepare for what's ahead. When you kill something big boar, deer, once even a cave lion, you don't eat it all at once. That's how fools die fat and then starve later. You dry the meat. Smoke it over low fire. Wrap it in fur, tie it with sinew, and hang it from high branches where even bears must work for it. Sometimes it's gone the next morning. You accept it. That's part of the gamble. The tools matter too. You've shaped your own flint blade sharp enough to shave hair, brittle enough to break on bone. You've carved handles from elk antler, tied them with strips of soaked leather that shrink as they dry, locking everything tight. When they snap, you remake them. When they dull, you chip them again. You carry a hammerstone like a second hand. It's smoother than your first lover's skin. It's always cold. And fire, God, the fire. It's the only thing you fear more than predators. Because when it's gone, everything else is faster death, cold, hunger, fear. Fire is your oldest pact. You feed it, it keeps you warm. You shelter it under bark, in your belly, in your dreams. You guard the ember like it's your last child. You make torches when you need to walk at night. Dry moss wrapped around a stick, dipped in tallow. It smokes more than it shines, but it buys you vision when the moon is hiding. Your clothes are another trick. Layers. Fur over hide. Hair turned inward. Bone needles punch holes in leather, threaded with gut strings. It's not soft, it itches. But it keeps the wind from slicing into your belly, like it wants to. And you stink. You all do. You've long since stopped noticing. Your sweat, the grease of old meat, the faint copper bite of dried blood, it's your perfume. It masks you from beasts. It marks you to each other. If you smelled clean, you'd smell wrong. Sometimes, when things are good, you store fat. Rare, thick, white chunks from inside the bones. You smear it on your chest, your cheeks, even between your toes. It seals out the cold. It makes you glisten like something powerful. You don't smile when you do this, but you feel something close. These systems imperfect ancient desperatier, why you're still alive. Why the boy who follows you each morning is still here. Why your prints remain pressed into cave floors long after the rains have passed. You don't think of these things as science or strategy. They are just what is, and every breath you draw is another small, defiant act of success. You know it can't last forever, but for now, it does. And that is enough. You never forget your first winter that nearly killed you. Not because it was the coldest, it wasn't. Not because of starvation you've been hungrier since. It was the stillness, the silence. The kind that sinks into your bones, tells you no help is coming, that even the wolves have better places to be. That winter taught you how to build shelter that doesn't just protect, ute in listens. The cave is good for that. Warm enough if you plug the cracks, defensible if you stay quiet. But caves are borrowed places, not built. And when you're far from home range, when the herd moves on and the old paths dry up, you make your own. You've done it before. Branches bent low and tied together, covered in hides, scraped thin and stitched with tendons, so fine they whistle when the wind blows right. You dig shallow into the ground, so the cold stays low. You stack stones around the base, smear them with wet clay that cracks in the sun but seals in the night. Inside, it's dark, but that's good. Darkness is warmth. Darkness hides light. A tiny fire pit in the centre, ringed with old bones and scorched rock. One small smoke hole above. You lie on piles of dry grass, mixed with rabbit fur. You place your sleeping side nearest the wall, your spear closest to the opening. No one teaches you this. The world does. You track the seasons now, not with calendars or stars, but with bone-deep instinct. You can smell winter coming in the trees. You can taste spring in the runoff. Summer is a flood of sound buzzing, chirping, howling, and autumn, your favourite, is the colour of rot and fat and harvest. You feel time the way prey animals do, as a narrowing or widening of options. Spring is cruelest. You expect rebirth, and sometimes you get it, but often it's hunger. Everything is thawing, but nothing is ready. Animals are lean. Plants aren't fruiting yet. The rivers are angry fast, swollen, and full of debris. You lose people in the spring, washed away, carried downstream. Summer gives you plenty if you can stand the bugs. They come in clouds. They drink your blood and leave welts that blister. You've smeared yourself in mud, in deer fat, in the crushed remains of bitter plants. It helps, a little. You don't bathe in summer. Water draws them, but you sweat constantly and stink like a beast. Everyone does. Fall is when you gather. Not just food stones, wood, stories. You cache tools, you line the cave with dried meat, you tan hides for patching clothes and sleeping mats. You even sharpen the bones of old kills into points and fish hooks. Everything becomes a tool in the fall, even you. And winter is waiting. You wait for the worst to pass. You wait for the ice to give way. You wait for meat to return. You sit beside a fire, burning old memory sticks carved by the dead, toys abandoned by lost children. You tell stories, not for fun, for memory, for warning, for something to fill the black. Your body knows the rhythm now. Your bones thicken with age. Your joints stiffen with cold. You eat less in winter, not by choice, but by habit. Your gut contracts. Your breath slows. Even your heart seems to thud with more purpose, fewer beats wasted. And when sickness comes, and it always does, you've learned what to do. You isolate the sick, not far, just enough. You wrap them in old furs, burn what they touch. You make steam pits, hot stones dropped into wet herbs in a sealed hut. You breathe in the sting of pine, yarrow, crushed garlic bulbs if you found them. Sometimes it works. Sometimes they sweat it out and return. Sometimes they just stop breathing. You bury them quickly, or leave them high, for the birds. Depends on what they wanted. Depends on how much time you have. You've even helped birth children. Not yours. You don't claim them. But you've caught them when they slipped out slick and screaming into the world. You've cut cords with flint and cleaned wounds with hot ash. You've watched women scream, bite through leather, and then fall silent, not always from relief. There are things you believe about birth, that it's a battle, that some win and some lose, that blood brings life, that it always costs something. Sometimes the cost is the mother, and sometimes it's the child. You've held both kinds in your arms, wondering if your warmth could trick them into staying. But the greatest truth you've learned, the one no one speaks, the one the old man mutters, only when he thinks the stones are listening, is that survival has nothing to do with strength. It's about stubbornness. The hare survives because it runs, the wolf because it waits. The old woman who lost both legs to frostbite 3 winters ago, she's still alive. She crawls now. She eats last. But she sings louder than anyone when the meat hits the coals. And you? You patch your boots with sinew, even when they tear again the next day. You fix your spearhead for the 6th time. You ration the last chunk of fat until it turns grey. You whisper to your fire before you sleep, like it's an old friend who might abandon you if you stop talking. You live not because you're strong, but because you refuse not to. And this place, this brutal, biting, frost-slicked world, starts to feel familiar, almost kind. Not because it helps you, but because it's honest. It doesn't lie to you with comfort or luxury. It tells you every day exactly what you must do to survive. And if you do it, you get one more sunrise. That's the bargain. That's the rhythm. And somehow you've kept it. They did not call themselves cavemen. In fact, they had no name for themselves beyond whatever sounds marked friend from foe, family from stranger, safe from unsafe. They were not the brutish, grunting stereotypes carved by bad movies and worse textbooks. They were human, fully, deeply, and devastatingly human just, shaped by a world that never gave them a day off from death. And they built more than fires and tools. They built societies. Small, yes, often no more than 20 or 30 at a time. But each group was a knot of rituals, secrets, jokes, rivalries, roles, and rules. The kind of intricate, emotionally charged order that comes only when life is constantly on the edge and you need others to survive. At the center of every group was not a chief in the way we imagine, but influence, earned and observed. The elders, those who had made it past 30, even 40 winter-scarred power, not through force, but through memory. They knew which valley flooded last season, which plants brought fever, where the herds returned each spring. That kind of knowledge made you important, revered, sometimes even feared. But leadership was rarely permanent. It shifted, often fluid. A skilled hunter might lead the chase. A cunning tracker might guide migrations. A midwife might hold the attention of all during birth season. The social structure flexed with need. And though the strongest sometimes led, strength alone was not enough. Those who took too much, hoarded food, demanded obedience, they didn't last long. The group would whisper, would withhold, would one day stop sharing the fire. That was a death sentence colder than the snow. Gender roles existed, but they were not iron cages. They were built from habit and survival, not ideology. Women gathered, yes, but they also hunted, especially small game, or when pregnant with energy and desperate for meat. Men crafted tools, but also raised children. The boundaries were there, but porous. When starvation is a breath away, no one argues about who's allowed to throw a spear. Still, some patterns held. Women, often, were the keepers of herbs of the soft knowledge, the healing hands, the bitter roots that stopped bleeding or started birth. They watched each other's backs during the gathering hours, eyes scanning for snakes, teeth, or rival clans, and they carried stories, through song, through symbols, through scars. Men, in turn, bore weight, carried carcasses on their shoulders, dug into frozen earth for firestone, sat long hours on cliffsides tracking herds that might never pass by. But when the time came to move, everyone moved together. The baby on the mother's back was as precious as the dried meat in the pouch. Children were not babied, they were respected, watched, given tasks as soon as they could stand. A toddler might learn to sort berries. A 6-year-old might flush rabbits from underbrush. By 10, you were part of the survival machine, not a burden, an engine. And yet, there was tenderness. Fathers played, mothers sang. When a child died, and they often did, the group did not shrug and carry on. They mourned, deeply, sometimes silently, sometimes with ritual. There are burial sites, 30, 0 years old, where the bodies of children are placed with carved beads, red ochre, feathers, tiny spears. These were not discarded lives. They were grieved. They had no gods in the modern sense, but they had beliefs, visceral, living systems of meaning. Spirits in the stones, power in the animals, messages in the stars, dreams that mattered, shadows that whispered. The world was not divided between natural and supernatural. It was all one thing. Alive, watching. Some carved figure small women, with exaggerated hips and breasts, sometimes faceless. They were not pornography, they were power, fertility, life in clay. You carried one when your partner bled too long, when your belly was swollen with child, when the food was low, and you begged the earth to open up one more root. They told stories at night, not for entertainment, but survival. The tale of the man who climbed too far and fell, the wolf who tricked the fire away from the bear, the girl who fed a spirit and lived forever in the northern lights. Stories carried warnings, instructions, culture. They also knew fear. They feared the dark, truly feared it. Not in a poetic way, but because things waited in it. Lions, bears, men with no names, lightning that struck without warning. Holes in the ice you couldn't see until you were in them. They feared being alone. Isolation was a wound that festered. You didn't banish someone unless they were beyond redemption. To walk alone in that world was to become prey in the deepest sense. Not just to teeth, but to madness. They feared the sky, too. The way it sometimes cracked open with light. The way it bled orange and black during fires. The way stars shifted and blinked, and sometimes vanished altogether. They watched the moon like it owed them something. Maybe it did, and yet despite the terror, the hunger, the endless grief, they loved. They made music, bone flutes, drums from stretched hide, rhythms that bounced off cave walls and made the old ones weep without knowing why. They marked their bodies, not just scars from wounds, but deliberate carvings. Ink made from charcoal and fat, pressed under the skin with bone needles. Symbols for family, for survival, for memory. They gave gifts, a sharp flint, a shiny shell, a handful of crushed berries. Love was not said, it was shared, through meat, through warmth, through risking your life to drag someone out of a river. This was not a world without culture. It was a world where culture was necessity, where every gesture, every sound, every glance across the fire meant something, where the line between survival and society didn't exist. They were not us, but they were human, to the bone. They didn't have laws, but they had limits. No carved codes, no written rules, just invisible lines etched into daily behavior lines everyone understood without needing words. These were not utopians, but neither were they anarchists. The group survived because the group mattered more than the individual. That was the fundamental truth. You could break many thingstools, bones, even a taboo, but if you broke trust, you were already dead. There were things you did not do, not because they were morally wrong in some abstract sense, but because they frayed the threads that held everyone together. You did not take food and lie about it. You did not hoard fire. You did not strike a child in rage. You did not walk away from the hunt without warning. You did not touch the dead before the burial rites. These rules were not told. They were enforced by memory, by shame, by silence, by averted eyes. Punishment came in cold shoulders, in withheld meat, in sleeping alone. And if it was bad enough, in exile, and that was worse than death. Because exile stripped you of the one thing you had, beyond survival, your place. Roles were everything, not rigid, but real. The gatherers, the hunters, the watchers, the weavers. Everyone did more than one thing, but everyone had a rhythm, and rhythm was sacred. The quiet girl, who always knew where to find mushrooms in shade, she was protected. The man who spoke to the fire and somehow always made it light, his words were given weight. The boy who couldn't throw a spear but made nets so clever they caught birds from the sky, respected. These roles were not ranked in wealth. They had no wealth, but in value, in gratitude, in memory. If you died doing your job, you were remembered. If you ran from it, you were not. Status did exist, subtle, complex, shifting, Not in gold or property, but in who got listened to when danger came, in whose jokes were laughed at, in who sat closest to the fire. Sometimes it came from skill. The woman who could read the sky, predict a storm an hour before it hit, she was worth her weight in mammoth. Sometimes it came from pain. The man who lost his wife and 3 children in a rock slide, who hadn't spoken in 2 winters, she held a space in the circle no one questioned. Grief earned gravity. People listened when he grunted. And yes, there were conflicts, fights, not every day, but often enough, over a kill, over a woman, over a lie. Fists, rocks, even blades, but most didn't end in death. Blood cooled fast when you shared fire with the one who spilled it. Resolution wasn't justice, it was necessity. They had rituals to release anger. A wrestling match, a screaming circle. You shouted until your throat cracked and the steam left your chest. Sometimes you danced it out, not for fun, but to remind yourself that your body still belonged to you. Rituals marked more than anger, they marked time. Puberty was not a birthday, it was an ordeal. When blood first came, the girl was taken by the elders, smeared in red earth, left to sleep alone one night in a fur-lined pit. The next morning, she returned different, marked, respected, now a bearer of life. Boys had to hunt alone, bring back something a liver dead, something they tracked, stalked, caught. It didn't have to be big, but it had to be real. Some came back with blood on their hands. Others didn't come back at all. If they did, the group painted their faces with ash and let them eat first. Mating wasn't assigned, but neither was it fully free. The group watched, judged. A man who hit his partner did not find many others. A woman who refused to share food was whispered about. But mostly, bonds formed and frayed on their own. Some lasted moons, others lifetimes. Jealousy existed. It just wasn't coddled. Sex was part of life, not hidden, not shamed, but not showy either. A pair slipped away from the fire. That was it. A glance, a nod, an understanding. Children born of those unions were everyone's responsibility. The mother nursed, the group raised. No one knew the exact father. Maybe some guessed. It didn't matter. A child alive was a future secured. The dead had their place too. Burials were simple but sacred. Bodies curled like sleepers. Ochre on the skin. A tool or token placed beside them. Sometimes a necklace, sometimes a shard of meat, sometimes nothing. But always, always something. They didn't speak the names of the dead for a time. Silence honored loss. Later, the name returned, usually in a child, a kind of resurrection. Taboos extended beyond behavior. Some places were not entered. A cave where 3 had vanished. A valley where the sun touched the ground wrong. Water that ran uphill. The people were not superstitious in the way modern minds think they were observant. Pattern hungry. When the world tries to kill you every day, you become an expert in reading omens. They painted walls. Not everywhere, not always, but sometimes in caves so deep the light could barely follow. Mammoths, bison, handprints, spirals, starbursts. Made with charcoal, clay, ochre, spit. These were not decorations, they were memories, maps, prayers. And when strangers came, because they did, from over the ridge or down the valley, the group grew quiet. You didn't greet them with open arms. You watched, you tested, you smelled the air for tension. Sometimes they came with gifts, shells, tools, songs. Sometimes they came with teeth. Trade existed. Barter, you gave antlers, got firestone, gave stories, got warmth. These exchanges were tentative, delicate dances between death and cooperation. A stranger could become family in a weaker ash in a day. Language was there, not ours, but full, complex, clicks, growls, hand signals, half-sung tones. Enough to plan a hunt, woo a mate, joke about a fart, curse the snow, praise the fire. They had no alphabet. They had no need. Everything that mattered was carved into the body, the earth, or the memory. This society, this tangle of blood, warmth, noise, grief, and laughter, was not a prelude to something better. It was its own kind of civilization. Complete, brutal, brilliant, human. They lived in a world with no maps, but they mapped everything. Not with ink, but with memory, with footprints, with bones placed just so, with painted shapes that bent the cave walls into stories. They could walk hundreds of kilometers over years and find their way back without hesitation. They knew where the river bent, where the berries fattened, where the best flint was buried like treasure beneath shale. Their world stretched far beyond the mouth of the cave. The Ice Age made movement a necessity. Herds moved, weather shifted. Glaciers advanced and retreated like slow gods. You moved or you starved. So they became migrants, pathmakers, travellers of deep time. And slowly, patterns formed routes, etched into the land by generations. Some sites were visited once a year, others only in famine. Some were sacred, known only to the elders. The land itself became a kind of infrastructure, not made, but managed. Rivers were water and highway, hills were lookout towers, meadows were markets if you waited long enough. Trade wasn't just a novelty, was survival. And it was wide. Archaeologists have found seashells from the Mediterranean in caves deep in the European interior. Volcanic glass from one valley in spearheads found hundreds of miles away, ochre from unknown quarries. What that means is simple. They moved, and they moved things with them. Not just goods, ideas. A new spearhead shape, easier to sharpen, a better trap, a knot that didn't slip, a way to drive animals toward a cliff. These weren't personal inventions, they were shared, tested, passed on in whispers and demonstration. Innovation wasn't hoarded, it was survival currency, and they built infrastructure not with bricks or mortar, but in stone memory. Caves with tool caches hidden deep inside chambers, trees marked with notches, stones piled in rings to mark season changes or death sites. They engineered without ever using the word. When food was plentiful, they stored. Pits dug into cold soil, lined with fur and ash, drying racks, bags made of stitched hide, fire-hardened wooden bowls sealed with resin, smoked meat, cracked bone filled with rendered fat. They weren't just surviving the day, they were planning for the months. But not everything was equal. Some had more than others, not always by design, sometimes by talent, luck, or birth. The woman who had survived 3 winters longer than anyone else, who never got sick, who somehow brought back more roots than anyone else, he didn't sleep in the back. She slept closest to the fire. She got first meat. It wasn't unfair, it was recognition. But slowly, these recognitions layered into something else. Status hardened. The child of that woman got attention. The man who led the most successful hunt got more than mead, got deference. And sometimes, resistance. They had no kings, but they had gravity, influence that settled on a few more than the rest. And with influence came risk. You could become too important, too envied. The group might rely on you until you failed. And then they would remember every time you took an extra hide, an extra cut of marrow. The same people who lifted you up could quietly let you fall. This was the earliest inequality, not in coins or castles, but in proximity to the center of the group, the fire, the story, the decision. Still, nothing was permanent. Power was smoke. It moved. They built systems of cooperation that would shame many modern nations. You helped feed children who weren't yours. You gave up meat if someone was injured. You carried old women on your back when the snow got too deep, because the group mattered, because you remembered the faces of those who did the same for you. Even their tools reflected this cooperative intelligence. Their blades were crafted with care, even aesthetics. Symmetrical, balanced, knapped with such skill they could gut a deer in minutes. But they weren't just weapons, they were gifts, trade items, heirlooms. Some were never used, buried instead with the dead. They worked bone into fishhooks, needles so fine they could stitch hide without splitting it, harpoons with detachable heads, tied with sinew to prevent loss, throwing sticks curved to fly farther than the arm alone could manage, spears with fire-hardened shafts and flint tips set with resin and twine. They created cordage from bark and gut, nets woven fine enough to catch birds mid-flight, baskets so tightly woven they could hold water, glue made from boiled hooves, paint from crushed minerals and animal fat. They were chemists who didn't need the word chemistry, and they sculpted, not for survival, but for meaning. Small figurines carved from mammoth ivory, some human, some animal, some both, half lion, half man, half bird, half child. These weren't toys, they were icons, concepts, dreams carved into matter. They built identity with stone. Their art wasn't just expression, it was infrastructure for memory. A painted bison might represent a successful hunt or the hope for one. A spiral might be a path, a handprint, a signature. You were here. You mattered. You remembered. And always, always, there was the fire. It was never just warmth. It was gathering. It was law. It was witness. You learned to speak around it, to confess, to perform, to pass on knowledge. No hunt was complete until it was relived around the fire, gestures acting out the kill, the danger, the triumph. Children learned more from that than from any lesson. The fire was democracy, myth, history, therapy. The fire was civilization. And yet even this fragile, brilliant system had cracks. Climate changed. Sometimes suddenly. A flood, a drought, a volcano far away that dimmed the sky. Herds moved, rivers dried, forests burned, groups scattered, some vanished. Competition for resources grew. Encounters with strangers grew tense. Not all ended in trade. Some ended in blood, some in disappearance. Even within groups, things frayed. An injury left untreated. A leader who hoarded too long. A food source gone. People left. Factions formed. Once in a while, someone simply didn't return from gathering. The system wasn't perfect, but it was adaptive. It endured. Through disaster, through exile, through winter after winter that cracked skin and souls alike, they kept building something together. Not cities, but connection. And that more than fire, more than flintis, the greatest infrastructure they ever made. They didn't know they were about to disappear. How could they? There were no clocks counting them down, no historians warning them of incoming extinction. They lived as they always had, by firelight, by ritual, by rithmand. Then, slowly, they were gone. But not all at once. First came the warming. The great sheets of ice that had held the world like a fist began to melt, not gently, not with mercy. Oceans rose, rivers surged. Valleys that had once fed them turned to swamps or vanished under water. And with that shift came the animals, or rather, the loss of them. The great herds moved on, some farther north, some gone for good. Mammoths thinned, bison scattered. The fat, heavy prey that had sustained generations dwindled, replaced by faster, smaller, leaner creatures, harder to hunt and easier to lose. The world got greener, yes, but not easier. Adaptation became more than habitat became the only game left. They shrank their tools, began to favour microliths, tiny flint shards embedded into wood, bone, antler, more versatile, easier to transport, lighter for faster prey. They fished more, trapped more, gathered with deeper attention. The old megafauna tactics driving herds off cliffs, ambushes with huge spears started to fade. So did the groups. Some merged, others fractured. Those that once gathered each solstice near familiar caves began to vanish from those sites. The fires still burned, but fewer came to sit beside them. But here's what didn't vanish: the memory. Because memory was the final weapon. Those who survived passed on stories, not as nostalgia, but as instruction. The tale of the broken hunt became a warning. The death of a child became a ritual. Every loss became a pattern. And the patterns grew. Soon, some groups began to settle longer. They found rivers that remained, forests that could feed. They built more permanent shelter structures of mammoth bone, reindeer hide, wood staked into the earth, places that could last more than a season. They stored more, hunted in tighter cycles, observed animals not just as prey, but as patterns. Migration became migration management. This wasn't yet farming, but it was a slow gravitational shift towards something more rooted. And along the way, the old world began to fossilize, not in literal bones, though those came too, but in custom. Rituals deepened. Symbols grew more elaborate. Caves filled with new paintings, more abstract, more layered. A single panel might be added to by dozens of hands across generations, each layering meaning, memory, mystery. Burials became more ornate. Jewelry, tools, antlers, clothing. The dead were not just mourned, they were staged. Their deaths became performances of community. And power? That changed too. Groups that once shared loosely began to settle into hierarchy, small at first, soft. The old matriarch who once held fire knowledge now held territory. The hunter who once led for skill now led because his father had. Inheritance crept in, not as law, but as convenience. Inequality began to crystallize. But so did legacy, because these people, whose names we will never know, left echoes, deep ones. A child buried 29, 0 years ago in Sungir, Russia laid to rest with 10, 0 ivory beads, painstakingly carved, each taking an hour to shape. That's not survival, that's meaning. A cave in Chauvet, France, its walls alive with lions, rhinos, mammoths not in chaos, but in composition. Painted with skill so precise, it suggests not just art, but training. A teacher, a student, a system. A figurine from Germany, part human, part lion, crafted from mammoth tusk, symbolic, impossible, mythic, suggesting a mind that could imagine beyond the real, a mind capable of gods. They were vanishing, but not fading. Their DNA survives in you, in all of us. Their scars, their fears, their joy at the return of spring, their delight in fire, their bone-deep memory that the group matters, that music matters, that death should be honored, and that every sunrise is a debt to be paid in effort. They lived harder lives than most of us can imagine, but they weren't broken by it. They shaped beauty from it. They wrung meaning from mud and ice and fear and blood. And they passed that meaning forward not in books, but in habits, in bones, in instinct. And though they disappeared, though their fires went cold, their ghosts remain. In every meal shared without keeping score, in every story passed from old mouth to young ear, in every handprint on a cave wall, saying not, "I was here," but "we made it." That was their legacy. Not buildings, not empires, but endurance. And that is civilization's true beginning. Long before the arches of Istanbul were layered in soot and steel, long before Ottoman cannons thundered across the Golden Horn, the night before the fall of Constantinople, May 28, 1453, was electric. The city lay under a bruised purple sky, its walls bloodied and battered, its people trembling aware that an empire's heart was on the verge of stopping. You're not inside the palace. You're in the Sultan's camp, perched on the edge of the Great Plain. The air is thick with smoke, gunpowder, and the metallic tang of sweat. Tens of thousands of Ottoman soldiers murmur in lines of disciplined desperation. Cannonsome nearly 25 feet long tower-like beasts, their barrels blackened by fire, their breath explosive. Sultan Mehmed II, just 21, paces behind one such cannon. He's eager, driven by prophecy, haunted by visions of glory. He nails a paper to the Barralan ultimatum to Byzantines that came with a mercy offer. It reads, "Open your gates and spare your people, or suffer ruin." The camp grows silent as a messenger rides in. He dismounts, with urgency in his eyes. Mehmed's gaze sharpens. Word has come. The defenders have bolted a chain across the entrance to the Golden Horn. That old wooden chainet will delay, but not stop him. In the dim torchlight, advisors clutch prayer beads. Generals measure maps by lanterns, pointing to gaps made by weeks of bombardment. Those holes are growing. They are weakening. The dream of an unbreakable wall is fading. Meanwhile, across the strait, Byzantium's defenders shiver inside the Theodosian walls. Emperor Constantine XI stands on the rampart, sword in hand, watching the dark silhouettes of siege towers and ladders creeping forward. Whispered prayers dart from man to man, but there's no certainty. Back in the Ottoman camp, Mehmed slips between tents, stopping to speak with cannon crewmen who've seen blast and blood. He pats one on the back, rewards another with early coin. Leadership is not his birthright alone, it's command, and tonight it's personal. He returns to his tent as dawn approaches, voice calm but steel-edged. Tomorrow we open the gates. Whether to mercy or massacre, he leaves unsaid. There's no comfort courtside, not when you're standing on the edge of history being torn apart. Inside the walls of Constantinople, everything feels slow, not peaceful, not calm, just slowed. Like time itself is afraid to keep going. The city is dim. Candles burn in windows. Incense curls through the alleys like smoke rising from a wound. Priests whisper liturgies to dwindling flocks in half-ruined chapels, their voices brittle, stretched thin by fear. The great dome of Hagia Sophia looms over the skyline, massive and cracked, the last defiant crown of a dying empire. Emperor Constantine XI Dragasses stands atop the inner wall, staring into the night. He's armoured, breastplate gleaming faintly in the torchlight, cloak furred at the edges. He doesn't look like a man who expects to live through tomorrow. But he also doesn't look like one who intends to surrender. The Ottomans are close now, too close. Their cannonades have torn sections from the great Theodosian walls, those triple layers of stone that once stopped the world. Now they're cracked, smoking, exposed. The breaches are wide enough for ladders, even siege towers. Behind the emperor, the city moves like a funeral procession. Shops shuttered, windows boarded, statues toppled, buried to prevent desecration. Holy relics carried hand to hand by trembling acolytes. The arm of St. Andrew, a splinter of the true cross, the Virgin's robe, all paraded as if they might shield stone and flesh from iron and fire. But relics don't stop cannonballs. At a nearby monastery, a woman sits beside a dying child, spooning him broth that hasn't been hot in days. His fever has broken, but so has his spirit. Outside, monks chant into the cold, praying for divine intervention, as if God can hear anything over the endless, distant thunder of Ottoman artillery. In the harbour, ships lie still behind the great chain-stretched taut across the mouth of the Golden Horn. It clinks softly in the water with each wave, a medieval tripwire straining to keep Mehmed's navy at bay. But the chain won't hold forever. Above it all, the moon is wrong. It rises, bloated and red, heavy with omens. In the city, people stop and stare. They murmur to each other in fear, a blood moon on the eve of battle. No one needs a priest to interpret that. Inside the Blacherne palace, Constantine meets with his generals. The room is lit by oil lamps and anxiety. Giustiniani, the Genoese mercenary commander, is injured wounded in the last bombardment. He refuses to leave his post, but he winces with every breath. Others argue over the weak points in the wall, how many men can be spared, whether the northern flank can hold. But the numbers don't lie. There are barely 7, 0 defenders left, maybe fewer. Many are volunteers, foreigners, monks with rusted swords, merchants in borrowed armour, boys too young to shave. Outside, there are over 80, 0 Ottomans. Inside the walls, faith is bending under the weight of inevitability. At Hagia Sophia, the church doors remain open through the night. The great bronze gates swing wide, welcoming anyone seeking refuge. Men and women come barefoot, heads bowed. Some carry infants. Some carry nothing at all. The mosaics shimmer in the candlelight gold halos, glass eyes, faces frozen in divine silence. A priest climbs to the pulpit and begins to chant the Akathist hymn. Others join in. It's not coordinated. It's not beautiful, but it's loud. Voices echo into the arches, defiant, terrified, pleading. 1,000 hands cross themselves. 1,000 tears fall. Outside, the Ottomans prepare too. In Mehmed's camp, drums begin. Low, relentless. Boom, boom, boom. The signal for formation. Soldiers rise like waves, janissaries in polished armour, barefoot volunteers, archers with quivers slung over thin shoulders. Torches are lit, siege towers creak into motion. The massive cannon Basilica Kul, now after its final blast, is pointed straight at the breach. And the Sultan? Mehmed doesn't sleep. He walks the rows himself, inspecting, encouraging, threatening. This moment has consumed his every thought for years. If he takes the city, he won't just be a conqueror. He'll be the shadow of Caesar, the boy who broke Byzantium. By midnight, Constantine returns to the Hagia Sophia, not as an emperor, as a man. He kneels before the altar, head bowed, no entourage, no crown, just armor and silence. He confesses. There is no priest, no ritual, just words mumbled to the marble. He speaks not to be forgiven, but to be known. Then he stands, wipes his eyes, and walks out alone. He visits the city's walls one last time. At each post, he thanks the men, touches their shoulders, offers words not of victory, but of dignity. He knows what's coming, everyone does, but he doesn't run. He chooses to die with his city. The final hours bleed away. Some sleep, clinging to each other in the corners of homes already half burned. Some pray until their throats dry out, others drink, or sing, or simply stare at the walls, waiting for the sun. And when it comes, it's not golden. It rises grey, smeared with ash. Light filters through the smoke like dirty water through cloth. The city takes one last breath, and holds it. The final assault begins before the city fully wakes. Just before dawn, the ground starts shaking not from an earthquake, but from thousands of feet moving in rhythm. The drums of the Ottoman army thunder faster. The horns scream. Fires flare across the plain outside the Theodosian walls, and the shadows begin to move. Mehmed's orders are clear. Attack in waves. The first to go are the expendable surregulars, prisoners, peasants, promised food or coin for the fight. They rush forward in a flood, ladders gripped in frozen hands, ropes coiled like snakes around their shoulders. The defenders on the walls, still blurry with fatigue and prayer, raise bows and crossbows. Arrows slice through the air, whistling death into the crowd. Boiling oil, rocks, and iron shards rain down. Men scream, ladders splinter, but more keep coming. In the breaches where the walls have crumbled, fighting is hand to hand, brutal, up close, no mercy. Bodies pile quickly, forming hills of blood and bone. The Byzantines are few, but they are desperate. They fight like people who know there is nowhere else to go. Then comes the second wave. These are trained men. Armed, armoured, disciplined. Janissaries stand ready behind them, silent, unmoving. The middle ranks engage with measured violence. They climb over the bodies of the first wave without blinking. Arrows darken the sky, but they press on. Inside the city, chaos has begun. The bells of Hagia Sophia ring without rhythm. Citizens rush through alleys with bundles of whatever they can, carry coins, bread, icons. Some run to the sea, hoping for ships, others to the churches, hoping for God. The defenders are breaking. Giustiniani, the Genoese commander, takes a wound to the chest. He collapses behind the battlements. Panic spreads. Rumours ripple he is dead. He has fled. Constantine begs him to stay, but the man is carried off the field. The emperor sees what it means. He knows the line will collapse. And it does. The final wave is Mehmed's finest, the Janissaries. Elite, relentless, indoctrinated from childhood to serve the Sultan's will. They strike where the wall has collapsed, completely ragged hole in the city's armour. They pour through. Constantine draws his sword. He doesn't hide, doesn't flee to the harbour. He charges into the breach with the last of his guards, fighting among the rubble. Slicing, stabbing, blood-soaked and shouting, his armour glinting like an echo of Rome. And then he falls. No one sees the exact moment. Some say he was cut down by a janissary. Others claim he threw off his royal cloak, shouted, "The city is lost, but I live," and vanished into the melee to die a nameless death. Either way, The last emperor of Byzantium dies with his sword in hand. The Ottomans flood in. They breach the gates. The walls are no longer barriers, they are bridges. Soldiers pour through the city like floodwater, splitting into factions. Some head for palaces, some for homes, some for churches. The slaughter begins quickly. Resistance collapses in minutes. Knives meet flesh. Screams echo off marble. Silk burns. Windows shatter. Fire spreads. Inside Hagia Sophia, thousands have gathered, packed shoulder to shoulder. Priests continue the liturgy, even as doors are kicked open. Women cry, children scream. The mosaics watch silently. For many, it is the end of the world. And in a way it is. The Janissaries enter. They cut down those who resist. They corral the rest. Gold is stripped from altars. The great silver doors are torn open. The church that once crowned Christian civilization becomes a war prize. Elsewhere, Mehmed enters the city slowly, deliberately. He rides a white horse, flanked by guards, beneath a crimson banner. His eyes scan the damage, the smoke, the broken walls, the silent dead. He sees not horror, but history. The fulfillment of prophecy, the rebirth of empire. He dismounts before Hagia Sophia. He orders it cleared. A soldier smashes the altar. A muezzin climbs to the pulpit and calls the first Islamic prayer in a space that hadn't heard one in 1,000 years. The walls still shine with Christ and angels, but the air is now filled with the sound of Allah's name. Mehmed kneels, not in mockery, in reverence. Not just to God, but to history. He orders the city to be spared after 3 days of plunder. It's the law of conquest. The soldiers will take their prize, gold, silk, people, and then he will begin to rebuild. The city is his. Byzantium is gone. Rome, at last, has fallen. And in its ashes rises Istanbul. You've been awake for hours, but you haven't moved. The forest is too quiet. The air sits thick and unmoving, as if the wind itself has turned away. You lie in your shelter half-woven thatch, a few rotting board's eyes fixed on the gap in the doorway. No sound, no birds, no crying child, no call to gather water, just silence. You were never supposed to be alone here. This place was supposed to be England's shining stake in the new World Roanoke colony, 1587. A fresh start, a new beginning, a foothold on the edge of empire. But now, even the ocean seems to have withdrawn, its usual roar muted to a distant murmur. You stand slowly, carefully. The forest presses in with its damp breath. Every step you take through the colony is quieter than the last. No footprints, no embers, no bodies, just gone. Weeks ago, there were children running between the makeshift houses, women boiling water in iron pots, men hammering new walls into the stubborn Carolina earth. Now, your foot crunches on a snapped tobacco leaf, and that's the loudest thing you've heard all day. This was supposed to be the first successful English colony in the Americas. Sent by Sir Walter Raleigh, led by John White, a group of 115 colonistsmen, women, children came, with dreams of land, wealth, escape. You were one of them, maybe not important, maybe just a settler. But here, you remember the promises: fertile land, native allies, freedom from the stench of London. What they didn't tell you was that the soil here grows hunger faster than crops, and the sky watches like it's waiting for you to fail. Now you walk between abandoned cabins. The tools are gone, the barrels too. No signs of panic, just relocation. But why and where? The word is still carved in the tree Croatoan. Deep letters, deliberate, not a hasty scrawl, not scratched in terror. Someone took their time, and someone wanted it read. You run a hand across the bark. It's rough, recent. You mouth the word, barely a whisper. Croatoan. It's the name of an island nearby, and of a native people, the Croatan. Were they allies? Enemies? Both? White had left to get supplies 2 years ago. 2 years. And you waited. Waited until hunger turned from a discomfort into a god. Until you saw things in the forest. Until names were whispered and faces disappeared. And now? There's nothing left to wait for. Laugh. In reality, no one knows what happened. When John White returned to the colony in August 1590 after being delayed by war in Europe, he found exactly what you're seeing now, an empty settlement, no fire, no bones, no struggle, just a palisade wall and a single word carved into a post. Croatoan. It was a clue, but one that never paid off. White had ordered the colonists to leave such a message if they were forced to relocate and to carve a cross if it was done under duress. There was no cross, just the name, that simple word. As if the entire colony had folded itself into the trees and disappeared into rumour. He never found them. Storms prevented his search party from reaching Croatoan Island. Supplies were low, morale was lower. He returned to England, haunted by ghosts no one else would ever see. Laugh. And so, Roanoke became the first American mystery. A colony vanished, a warning, echoing down the centuries. Some say they were killed by native tribes, though there's little evidence of a massacre. Others believe they assimilated, fled famine and conflict, and joined the Croatan willingly. That they adapted became something between English and indigenous, until their old identity was washed away like paint in the rain. Some even whisper of something darker. That disease took them. That madness claimed them. That the woods themselves consumed them, strange lights, unnatural silence, something watching just beyond firelight. The earliest colonists often spoke of a presence in the forest, something ancient and unknowable. But these were fearful men in a strange land. Their minds bent easily under pressure, and yet Roanoke remains unclaimed. No graves, no bones, no journals, no signs of fire or battle. Just that word. You kneel by it again, fingers pressed to the grooves. Croatoan. And you wonder, not for the first time, were they trying to lead someone to them, or warn them away? You walk through the dense woods around what was once Roanoke, now overgrown and whispering secrets no one can quite catch. The canopy above blocks the sun, casting mottled shadows that seem to flicker at the edge of your vision. You feel the crunch of dead leaves underfoot and the cool, damp breath of the forest pressing in on all sides. Archaeologists have tried to unravel this mystery for centuries. They dig through layers of earth, unearth shards of pottery, fragments of tools, pieces of English and Native American life, tangled like the roots beneath the soil. But no evidence of violence, no charred remains of desperate fires, no mass graves. Instead, they find tracer scattered artifacts suggesting movement, perhaps integration with the Croatan people. Beads with English-style cuts found alongside native pottery. Bones bearing marks of European and indigenous diet. Signs of a merging of worlds, though no written record tells that story. You kneel beside a small excavation pit, brushing away centuries of dirt. The earth feels heavy, as if carrying the weight of all those lost voices. You think about the colonists, some just children, who vanished without a trace, swallowed by a forest that knows no forgiveness. In local legends, the forest is alive. Some say the Croatan spirits still walk these woods, guardians of secrets too dangerous for outsiders. Others tell of phantom lights that dance at night, leading travelers astray. The colonists' fate has become a ghost story, a warning whispered to children about the cost of hubris and the unknown. But historians and scientists continue to search, combing archives, analyzing pollen samples, tracing the movements of native tribes, and piecing together fragments of letters and journals. Each clue opens new questions. Did the colonists find refuge with native allies? Did they succumb to disease or starvation, and their remains dissolve into the earth? Or was there something else, something stranger? You hear the wind shift and tighten. The silence deepens. You sense the pull of the mystery knot, just a question of history, but a riddle that stirs something ancient within you. The human fear of disappearance, of being forgotten, of vanishing without explanation. The colonists' disappearance leaves a scar in history. It marks the fragile intersection of two worlds' European ambition and the unyielding wildness of America. A failure of preparation, a collision of cultures, a story unfinished. And sometimes, when night falls and the forest breathes, you wonder if somewhere beyond the trees, beyond the reach of maps and memory, those lost voices still call out for rescue, for recognition, for peace. The sun rose over Querétaro on June 19, 1867, with a sky so clear it seemed to mock the drama unfolding beneath it. Emperor Maximilian I of Mexico, once a prince of Austria and hopeful monarch, now stood shackled and alone, the weight of a shattered empire heavy on his shoulders. His silk robes were long gone, replaced by coarse prison clothes stained with dust and blood. His hands, once accustomed to the gilded halls of Vienna and Miramar Castle, trembled slightly as they were bound behind his back. The courtyard was silent, except for the quiet murmur of soldiers and the occasional metallic clink of chains. Maximilian's eyes, sharp and blue, scanned the faces of his captors, Mexican Republican troops under General Mariano Escobedo. They were the men who had ended the dream of empire on this distant land, the ones who refused to bow to European crown or foreign ambition. His fate had been sealed months earlier when the French withdrew their troops, leaving him isolated and betrayed. The grand vision of a Mexican monarchy, imposed by Napoleon III's imperial designs, had crumbled under guerrilla warfare and the indomitable spirit of Benito Juárez's Republicans. As the execution squad assembled, Maximilian straightened, his chin lifting with a dignity born of conviction, defiance, or perhaps resignation. He refused a blindfold. The soldiers loaded their rifles with grim efficiency. The colonel in charge gave the order. The volley rang out. Maximilian's body jerked, once, twice, then stillness. Behind him, the crowd and uneasy mix of local townsfolk, soldiers, and foreign observers held their breath. Some wept. Others stared in disbelief. The execution was both an end and a brutal beginning, a death that echoed far beyond the walls of Querétaro. His death was a statement, a message to monarchs, republics, empires, and revolutionaries alike. Europe watched, shocked, Mexico mourned, divided, and the world marked the collapse of imperial ambition in the Americas. But Maximilian's story did not end with his death. His wife, Carlota, descended into madness, haunted by visions of rescue and betrayal. His legacy splintered between legend and cautionary tale emperor, who dared to dream beyond his bounds and paid the ultimate price. In Mexico, the scars of this imperial episode lingered. The Republic endured, but the memory of foreign intervention remained a wound in national consciousness. The image of Maximiliana tragic outsider, executed by firing squad, became a symbol both of hubris and sacrifice. History remembers him as a man caught between worlds, a Habsburg prince out of place in the turbulent politics of the New World, a European monarch whose crown was forged in the fires of colonialism, and whose end was written by the resilience of a people fighting for self-determination. As the sun set over Querétaro that day, it cast long shadows that still stretch across centuries and continents, reminding us how history's great dramas are often shaped by ideals, power, betrayal, and the human cost beneath.